topic today is legal interpretation. The issue that each and every one of us is dealing daily with. We interpret things from the very, very first moment of our life. A baby appearing to this world is trying to understand what is surrounding him or her. He or she is touching something, tasting something, feeling something, and reacting to something. I wish to start with an interesting example. I personally have survived through while being on an exchange many years ago in the United States on a wonderful flex program. It was in the midst of rural Alabama, not very far from its capital. I was going to a high school. It was, as I said, many years ago. I remember I arrived very late. And about 3 a.m. And I had a school bus scheduled for 6 o'clock in the morning, so there's not much time to sleep. And when I finally woke up, having just 3 hours sleep, did everything what you usually do in the morning, got dressed myself up, put my shoes on, took the bus, went to the school, had the first class, then the break, the second class, and during the second break, when I was finishing my regular Dr. Pepper, a girl approaches me. And she said, Ievgen, she said. Not a single American would properly pronounce my name, but I lived with it. Why in the world, she said, do you have 2 different shoes on? One black and one light brown. That's not the kind of question you usually get every day, and that's not the kind of question you have answers to. I looked down to my feet and noticed that she was right. The right one was purely black, the left one was light brown. Happens sometimes. Never happened to me before. And you know, when you are being faced with such a question, you have to react somehow. And different people react to that in a different way. And I had nothing better to invent and nothing better to say than to say that we have a holiday in Ukraine. A holiday when all the people, all Ukrainians, dress like that. Every single person in the country wears one black shoe and one brown shoe. It was spontaneous reaction, because no person in a sane state of mind would say that it's just that I did not have enough sleep and accidentally I missed the 2 shoes. The thing that embarrassed me very much is the reaction of that girl. She believed that story. The story I personally did not believe. In fact, we do not have that kind of holiday in Ukraine. And not a single country in the world that I've been to, that I've heard of, would have that kind of a holiday. I don't remember when that was, probably in February. But I kept getting postcards on that same very day for a couple of years after I left the US. which would congratulate me with that holiday. I really don't remember what was the name that I have given to this holiday. All that is interpretation. This is the process that each of us is being faced every day, every moment of our life, starting with the very, very first moment until the very last moment we live in this world. We interpret different things. Artists interpret paintings, interpret music. Sociologists interpret different surveys. Priests and rabbis interpret holy scriptures. And lawyers interpret statutes, wills, contracts, and constitutions. But what is that interpretation? The interpretation, in fact, is the process of deriving a message. A message which permits us, as intelligent creatures in the world, to make a certain decision. This may be a decision attributable to our own selves, or this may be a decision that would affect some other person. Interpretation is, in fact, a very complex issue. I love to turn to another example while dealing with this in my classroom. The very famous example of a pure glass of water, which you can see in front. The long-lasting philosophic question, whether this glass is half full or half empty. Each and every one of us has his or her own answer to this. Moreover, this answer changes with time. It changes depending on our mood, on our state of mind, and this is what the psychologists would say, that if you are in a good mood, you will definitely say that it's half full. If you are in a bad mood, there is a higher probability that you would say that this glass is half empty. Interpretation is attributable to many professions. As I already mentioned, these are the artists who deal with it. These are religious leaders. These are journalists, politicians, lawyers. And this is the issue that, unlike many, many other issues in science, in academia, does not have a single correct answer. My interpretation would sometimes be different than your interpretation. What I'm doing right now is trying to deliver a message on what interpretation is. And there are very high chances that your glimpse of this message will be different than mine. And that's normal. Interpretation has very, very deep ancient roots. We must also say that interpretation is attributable not only to intelligible creatures, not only to humans who can think. Animals interpret this world as well. They also do get messages that permit them to make decisions, whether to eat someone, whether to hide somewhere, whether to do something else, like protect their kids from predators, for example, or whether to go on and produce someone who has the same features as they do. But the difference between interpretation being made by animals and interpretation made by humans lies in the efficiency theory. The interpretation, the deriving of a message being done by humans, will always have to deal with the issue of efficiency. The message that we get through interpretation permits us to make intelligible decisions. It permits us to act either efficiently or inefficiently. And this was well noted many centuries ago. This was noted by ancient people, by ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Chinese, Indians, by Greek philosophers, who in fact invented a special study dealing with interpretation called hermeneutics. That study has the name of one of the ancient gods, the Hermes, whose main idea was to deliver the message of the will of other gods to regular people, who from the point of view of those gods were unable to comprehend by themselves what those gods were willing for them to do. Hermeneutics further evolved, and we now deal with legal hermeneutics, with artistic hermeneutics, with philosophical hermeneutics, and many other attributions of this study. But let's go back to the sole notion of interpretation. The main essence of interpretation, the cornerstone of it, is being able either to comprehend a certain message or to deliver it to someone else. And then we are being faced with an issue of what a message is. How do we deal with it? And why do we need it? In fact, message helps us live efficiently, make efficient decisions by not spending our time and efforts for finding out some stuff that has been already found out by someone else. And that's how books appeared, that's how songs appeared, that's how tales appeared, and that's how, in fact, texts appear. I love another example on what a message is. I like to show it to my students in class. And I hope they like it as well. What I'm holding in my hand may have different attributions. This may be viewed as a clear white sheet of paper, something material, something that has its characteristics. But what makes a plain sheet of paper to entail a message? A very important thing. This white sheet of paper being put in a context may do have a meaning. And this is the main attribute of a message, the meaning, the information that it entails. While I am sitting here and talking to you, this is just an attribution of this lecture. If I would have been in a war, this would have another meaning. This would probably mean that I wish to surrender. If I am dealing with a certain contract, a plain sheet of paper may mean that the other party is acquainted with the offer received, but is willing to decline it. Interpretation, in fact, being a complex issue, deals with a big problem. The problem of no correct answer. Let's take another example. There is a girl that a certain guy finds pretty. There is another guy who disagrees with the first guy, saying, no, she is not pretty. Which guy has the correct answer? Well, both of them are interpreting the features of that person. They may argue about it, but then a third guy arrives, saying, you cannot say that the girl is not pretty, because girls are pretty. All of them are pretty. The problem with the third guy is that he is saying that neither of the first ones is making a correct answer. But the problem with his statement is that he himself deems his answer as the correct one. By saying there is no correct answer, an interpreter is trying to show that his idea, his meaning, is deemed by him as the right one. And that third statement suffers from the very same incoherences as the first two. And that incoherence is that there may be a fourth guy who will disagree with the third one. And we see that throughout our whole life. We argue on things, we disagree on different things, and collectively we are trying to get to the message that the majority of us is deemed to understand as the one that is most efficient for a certain group of people. I wish to turn back to that glass example. The thing that I like to show to my students as well. We may add another element to this, the one I'm holding in my hand. This example is a well-known experiment from physics. This is an object, and it starts interacting with another object. And as you can see right here, the perception of this object is different. And the difference in the perception of this object is the surrounding. The idea an interpreter gets about this pen being put in the water is different than the idea an interpreter gets from this pen being outside of the water. And this feature is very important for every interpreter. Whenever we interpret things, we have to take into account the surrounding, the context. And these are two contexts you see in front of you. The upper context, the air, creates one glimpse. The lower context, the water, creates another. This is the same pen. I didn't break it. But it still gives a different idea depending on how you put it. When an interpreter is dealing with the task of delivering a message to someone, interpreter needs to understand who the audience is. Who is going to listen to him? Who is going to watch his play? Who is going to read that? And this also creates problems. It creates the problems of the interaction between an author and the reader, between the person who has initially provided a message and the person who is trying to get that message. And I would now turn to a famous saying of a French philosopher, Paul Ricoeur, who had once said that in fact, when we're dealing with a text, the author of the text in interpretation is just the first reader of this text. And the author himself or herself may later have a different idea in interpreting his own words. We may deal with politicians providing us with the interpretation of different areas of our life. Do we always believe them? I will leave that question unanswered. Do we always believe that when parliamentary members are writing a certain bill and are talking about the aims of this bill, that it's supposed to solve a certain issue in our life? Do we believe that? Somehow we think that the main idea of a politician and the main idea of parliamentary member in interpreting something is simply to get re-elected, or elected in case when that politician does not hold office yet. When we're dealing with legal instruments, with legal documents, we're facing with a serious challenge of getting several correct answers. And if there was no third element in interpretation process, if there was no third issue that deals with interpretation, be it a legal interpretation, or religious, or artistic, or any other, we would end up in a chaos. Somehow we know that if we are facing a traffic light, red means stop, and green means go. We may not approach a red light meaning green, because otherwise it would not be able to survive on the road. And this is very important for legal interpretation itself. What is legal interpretation? There is a very big ongoing debate on the issue. Some philosophers, some lawyers would say that legal interpretation deals with interpreting legal texts. And it's hard to disagree with that. However, interpreting legal acts has the same qualities of legal interpretation as dealing with interpreting legal texts. What should we attribute to legal interpretation? My idea is that since interpretation is delivering a message, legal interpretation is in fact the interpretation that deals with delivering a message that has some legal results. Be it the results from a court decision, be it the results from an academic article focusing on certain legal issues, or be it the idea of dealing with certain legal act, divorce, for example. However, the majority of approaches to legal interpretation do focus on legal texts, because text as a set of symbols is the easiest way to have the message delivered. And when I was showing the blank sheet of paper, in terms of war, in terms of contract, that is a legal message. It does have a legal consequences.